Have you ever experienced that feeling? A conversation is flowing normally, a relationship that seems stable, and then suddenly, silence. Not a comfortable pause, but a heavy, loaded quietness, an invisible wall being built with each passing second. Messages go unanswered, calls go to voicemail, eyes avoid contact in a room with no explanation. That sudden silence is not merely the absence of sound, it is its own language, a paradoxical one, where everything left unsaid becomes larger and more haunting than anything voiced. It sends your mind spinning with unanswered questions. What did I do wrong? What's going on? Why can't they just talk about it? The void created by silence is always filled by our own speculation, and often the stories we tell ourselves are more painful than the truth. So, what is truly happening in the mind of someone who chooses to retreat into silence? And how can we, on the other side of that wall, understand this cryptic language without hurting ourselves in the process? To untangle this emotional knot, we need to step out of our personal, wounded perspective and view it calmly through the lens of psychology. Sudden silence, often described by psychologists as a form of cutting off communication, is rarely a singular act. It is the endpoint of a complex internal process, the surface symptom of unresolved inner conflicts. This behavior can be analyzed through the framework of attachment theory and coping mechanisms. Individuals with anxious or avoidant attachment styles often tend to use silence as a defensive strategy when they feel threatened, emotionally overwhelmed, or powerless in communication. Simultaneously, from a cognitive perspective, silence can be a form of processing pause when an individual is so flooded with intense emotions that the language regions of the brain become temporarily scrambled, making it impossible to translate inner experiences into coherent speech. This action can also be passively powerful. It is a way for a person to reestablish boundaries when they feel their personal space has been violated, or when they feel their voice carries no weight. However, behind what appears to be similar external behavior lie vastly different motivations and inner worlds, which can be categorized into three main psychological groups. The first group consists of those who fall silent due to overwhelm and self-protection. Imagine a person whose nervous system is in a constant state of high alert. Every conflict, however minor, can trigger a fight or flight response at an emotional level. For them, an argument, an unintentional criticism, or even expectations from others can feel like a profound threat to their safety and self-worth. Lacking effective emotional regulation or communication skills, the only option they see as viable is withdrawal. The silence here is not to punish you, but a survival mechanism. They are drowning in their own emotional flood. Repressed anger, fear of abandonment, deep-seated helplessness, to the point where any words risk becoming an explosion or a breakdown. They are silent to prevent themselves from saying something hurtful, to avoid making the situation worse, or simply because they have no energy left to engage in an interaction where they feel wounded. In this case, silence is a wordless cry for help, a signal that they are overloaded and need space to stabilize their nervous system. Yet, because it is not articulated, it is easily misinterpreted by the receiver as indifference, coldness, or intentional punishment. The second group employs silence as an intentional, power-laden communicative behavior, often related to control dynamics. This is what therapists might call the silent treatment. In this dynamic, silence is used as a tool to punish, to manipulate the other person's emotions, or to gain the upper hand in the relationship. The silent person here does not feel powerless. On the contrary, they feel in control. By withdrawing attention and connection, two fundamental human needs, they plunge the other into insecurity, forcing them to self-examine, apologize, or concede. This action often stems from emotional immaturity, low self-esteem that seeks validation by making others pursue them, or sometimes the repetition of a toxic pattern learned in the past. This type of silence is cyclical. It creates an anxiety loop in the receiver, and the receiver's surrender further reinforces the tactic's effectiveness, making it highly likely to recur. It fundamentally differs from the first group in that one falls silent due to a loss of internal control and a need for self-protection, while the other uses silence to establish external control. And the third group, perhaps the most complex and painful, consists of those who are silent as part of the process of preparing for separation or accepting an internal truth. Sometimes silence is not a tactic or an immediate reaction, but a process. It is the period during which a person gradually withdraws emotionally from a relationship they feel is beyond repair, no longer compatible, or has been damaged too deeply. This silence is a sign of quiet resignation. They have stopped trying, stopped arguing, stopped hoping. All necessary conversations seem to have taken place in their mind, and a conclusion has been reached. They are silent because there is nothing left to say. Any explanation seems futile. Every effort feels like banging one's head against a wall. This silence is often accompanied by a false sense of peace and emotional detachment. It can be the final stage before an official goodbye, or it can become the permanent state of the relationship, an emotional divorce while the external form persists. Facing this type of silence often brings a profound sense of loss, because it is not explosive but a gradual fading, denying the person left behind a clear endpoint to grieve. So, facing these different forms of silence, how should we respond? The first crucial step is to introspect calmly. Does this relationship have a history of respect and repair after conflict? Or is this silence a recurring, manipulative pattern? The answer often lies in behavioral patterns of the past, not just a single incident. Second, recognize that you are only responsible for your half of the relationship. You can open the door for dialogue with a calm message, expressing your observation. I've noticed there seems to be some distance between us lately, and your desire to understand, rather than accusing or demanding a response. But then, you must hand the choice back to them. Forcing a silent person to speak will only make them retreat further or produce a lie to escape the situation. The key is to establish boundaries for yourself. How long can you wait? Can you accept a relationship where silence is the primary language? Does another's silence have the right to overthrow your inner peace? Sometimes the most profound action is not to break their silence, but to listen to your own inner voice amidst that quiet. Perhaps the greatest lesson from unexpected silences lies not in deciphering what the other person isn't saying, but in learning how to exist in uncertainty, to respect another's emotional process even when it pains us, and more importantly, to learn to treat gently the frightening stories our own minds create in that vacuum. Ultimately, every relationship is a communication between two inner worlds. And sometimes, silence is simply a sign that those two worlds temporarily lack a common language. Our task, perhaps, is to decide whether we have the patience and courage to build a new language together, or to recognize that it's time to walk separate paths where silence is no longer a dividing wall, but simply the personal space each needs to heal.